I guess we can start now. Welcome for the next our seminar. So Professor Charli Uokera could explain us the topic for today. And Charlie, could we start from you, or we are starting from the presentation as you wish? And today the presenter will be Kirill, the co-author of Irina's background.
Mm-hmm. I could say a few words to begin with before the presentation, and maybe go from there. Okay.
Yes. So we could start. I guess the floor is yours, please. So I can remind the topic if you wish.
No, that's okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so yeah, today's seminar is quite similar to last week in terms of both in terms of the problem and the way that the problem is being addressed in the paper that we're looking at. So we're again looking at stigma in relation to autism spectrum disorder, people, I'm going to say people with ASD, to make it a bit easier. So, of course, autism is very easily stigmatized because people with ASD appear to lack kind of normal human emotions and capabilities. And so in Goffman's term and Goffman's construct of stigma, it's easy to see how people with ASD are positioned as being less than human, as not having full sort of human capabilities in popular perceptions and in their experiences of everyday life. So stigma being attached to ASD people is very widespread, it seems, and also parents of children with ASD are stigmatized, but usually in a different way because of the misrecognition of them as bad parents. So when people don't understand that their children have ASD, they position parents of ASD children as incapable of normal parenting. So I had a look at the research on attitudes towards ASD, and as with Sergei's paper last week, the paper today and a lot of the literature, so it seems, takes as a starting point the idea that non-ASD people have varying levels of knowledge about people with ASD, and these knowledges might underpin dehumanizing attitudes and prejudices towards ASD people. And so the goal in all of this body of research seems to be to identify the level of knowledge of people without ASD, and then potentially to educate them to improve their kind of scientific knowledge of ASD and the various symptoms that it involves and the nature of the condition. And so there's a lot of these studies that I saw in doing a quick kind of literature review. And most of all, one sees the criticism that surveys of attitudes and of knowledge about ASD present a very partial view of the problem. So some studies show that that people might have quite positive views of people with ASD, or they might have a good level of knowledge and understanding about ASD, but in real life situations, they can be quite sort of dehumanizing in the treatment of people with ASD. So, for example, when presented with people who had ASD, but not being told that they had ASD, they had in some research, they had quite negative attitudes towards those people because they evaluated their personalities as being less than human, even though they said they have positive attitudes towards ASD. So there are problems in that respect. But one of the really sort of key problems in this literature is that there seems to be a tendency to adopt a neurotypical approach. So in other words, an approach which positions ASD as being somehow abnormal and subhuman, and then exploring the extent to which people accept this abnormal condition, rather than taking a neurodiversity perspective, which celebrates ASD for the differences, rather than focusing on the deficits, the apparent deficits that ASD people have. So that kind of neurodiversity approach, I think, is really important. And it can be brought into survey research, although it's probably easier to bring into to more sort of interview-based research. So there are different sort of positives and negatives in this kind of research. Altogether, I think, like last week, I do find these approaches somewhat frustrating, because there's very little in that kind of approach that tells us something about sort of the micro or macro approaches to people with ASD and the sorts of problems that they face in everyday life, and the way that these problems differ from one society to another. So, we could think about, for example, how in Russia the tendency to so everywhere there is a tendency to dehumanize and stigmatize people with ASD. But one could ask, well, in Russia, to what extent has culture and policy and ideology the situation faced by people with ASD in terms of educational policy, social policy, ideology? How have these different factors shaped the extent to which ASD people face stigma and exclusion as people with ASD? Or did it recognize neurodiversity? Did it pursue policies of educational inclusion or of exclusion? Is there inclusivity at different levels of the education system, from kindergarten up to university? All of these sort of macro level questions, I think, remain to be asked. Of course, that was just a historical perspective, but how has that developed in the post-Soviet period? At the micro level of everyday life, we could ask, we could conduct research on how ASD people and their parents are treated in day-to-day life. We could start with these perspectives in kind of trying to understand the problems that they face, rather than starting with the question of public knowledge about the problems that they face. So that's my take on the literature. And I look forward to hearing the paper now in a bit more detail. Obviously, I read it, but often in presentation, one can see how it holds together better.
Thank you, Professor Walker. So, Irina Kazbekovna and Kirill, who will start?
Well, Alexander, thank you. I'll just say a few words about this work. Mostly will talk Kirill, because, well, I'm a scientific supervisor, and the main work is done by Kirill, and he works on this topic, well, approximately for 4 years, as I guess. So for us, this research is very important, and we tried to send this text to several good journals. Well, Kirill will probably tell us what was the journals, but, well, the paper was rejected without any concrete feedback. So now we just want to understand what to do with this text to make it better, and to probably make more real that it would be published somehow and somewhere. Well, I guess also Kirill, please.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone, one more time. Actually, I just calculated, and I think that we've been working on this topic for 5 years, because we started in 2018. So, I'll just start and share my. The name of the current paper is Factors Determining the Perception of People with Autism Spectrum Disorder in Russia. Well, this paper is about, we tried to measure and research which factors might influence the perception of people with ASD by non-autistic people in Russia. First of all, I will tell a little bit about ASD itself. We had a brief introduction about this topic by Charlie, but I will repeat about it a little bit. So, autism spectrum disorder is an area of developmental disorders. There's a spectrum of them. So people, autistic people who has it, they might show different range of them. So for some people, this is really struggle that harms them to live their normal life, and they can't do this because, without permanent support. And for some people, they can live more or less easily. Well, there are two prime characteristics of ASD. First of all, is problem with social communication and interaction. So all people with ASD, they experience some kind of problems with socialization, with interaction with the society. It might be difficult for them to communicate and so on. And the second is they're keen to some repetitive patterns in their behavior. They might do the same thing for the day. It's thought that this is one of the things how autistic people might cope up with the stress that they experience. So that's it. Then, first of all, I would like to tell about the problem statement, about how, why we believe that this topic is important, why it's important to understand how the perception of ASD is formed. So there is the lack of understanding of this problem in general in the society leads to the fact that most people in Russia, they don't have any objective or correct knowledge about ASD, what it is, who are people with ASD. Most of the people have heard the term ASD itself, but what does it mean? How it might influence autistic people's lives? Mostly those things are not known to most of the people in Russia. So we believe that this lack of understanding, this lack of correct image of people with ASD leads to some stereotypes, wrong assumptions that on their own might lead to any incorrect behavior towards people with ASD that might make life of those people more difficult than it is. It is even more difficult for them to socialize. And we believe that by studying those mechanisms, those social mechanisms of how perception is formed, we can understand this, and probably we can use this knowledge to somehow make somehow to increase the ASD awareness in the society and make the lives of people with ASD much better. So the purpose of this research breaks to two tasks. So the first task is, what we did is to determine the perceptions itself of ASD people by non-autistic people. So basically, we tried to determine how do non-autistic people might view autistic people. And the second task is, using those perceptions, we wanted to measure and study what relations and connections there are between the perceptions to some other characteristics of non-autistic people among those non-autistic people, among those characteristics of non-autistic people are social demographic characteristics, sex, age, having children, type of city they live in, and also more difficult concepts like objective knowledge, self-interest in ASD, having experience of communicating with a person with ASD, and of course attitudes towards ASD. Our prime focus was on attitudes first, because, like I said, we believed that the perceptions, like how a person sees an autistic person, might influence how he might express his opinion or behave towards autistic person if he meets him in real life. So next, I will tell a little bit about the methodology. It was a quantitative research done via online questionnaires. So we conducted an online survey. We got about 1,300 completed surveys. We those people who we spreaded this survey via social network communities. First of all, we spreaded this via ASD communities in Facebook, because it was important for us to get the opinion of those people who somehow, or they have relatives with ASD, or they somehow have the interest to this topic. But most important, we collected the opinions of people. Well, we spreaded this survey via a lot of psychology communities, parenthood communities. We wanted to get the opinion of users of people who were even a little bit interested in those topics, because this would affect the completion of survey, and we are mostly important in the opinion of those people, because so they might have some kind of opinion because they're interested in those topics, and this is the analyzing of opinions of those people is like more important and more likely to give any results than like of those people who who have no idea about this, like never, because how you can have some kind of relation towards it if you don't know nothing about it. So, and the sample of the criteria of the criteria of the sample were social demographic characteristics, age, and sex, and of course this degree of ASD awareness, so how close a person might encounter ASD in his life. Is it he just saw a person with ASD once, or he has I'm sorry, or he or she has a relative with ASD, or he has a friend or something, and of course his perceptions and his opinion on this might change because he has different level of interaction with this topic. So next, first of all, before going to the results themselves, I just want to one more time define some important concepts of this research. Well, first of all, is perceptions of people with ASD. Like I said earlier, this is the way, this is the image what a non-autistic person might have about an autistic person. So, in other words, this is an answer to the question, who is an autistic person? We believe that each person might have this answer in some way, and this is the perception. So this is like an image of an autistic person that non-autistic person have. And the second concept is attitudes towards people with ASD. So this is how an autistic person might treat people with ASD, or even might behave towards them. And like I said earlier, we believe that the first concept, perceptions, might influence the attitudes. We don't see attitude like one concept, because we believe that attitudes change based on some of the characteristics of people with ASD, and so we measured this concept like on 6 scales. We measure attitudes towards ASD people based on their age. Is an autistic person an adult or a child? And also, is he showing, and also based on the type of behavior he or she is showing, is his or her behavior is normal, strange, or aggressive? Like I said, we believe that, well, based on those type of behavior, the attitudes might change. So here goes the first task, this determination of perceptions of ASD person. It was done using text cluster analysis. In our survey, we had a question, who is an autistic person to you? And it was an open question, and people wrote texts answering this question. So we got about 1,300 texts of answers of people on the question, well, how do they perceive an autistic person? And using text clustering, we were able to get 4 clusters, like 4 types of perception. First of all, the first cluster is beliefs that autistic people are the ones having defection of development. Those people believe that autistic people, they see autism is a defect. It is this is something with the how to put this, like a mistake in development, which is not completely correct about ASD. The second cluster is autistic people have problems with communication and socialization. What is interesting about this cluster is that those people got like one of the major characteristic of ASD, that those people have problems with communication. So we believe that those people are the ones who are more aware about this. Like, they understand that most probably they have some correct knowledge and understanding of ASD, and so they translate answers to this question even using the correct terms. The third cluster is autistic people have difficulties in behavior. This cluster is the most like the broad one, and this is probably of those people who have less understanding of what ASD is, and they tell just like the most general expression. Well, autism is something bad, something that might influence people's lives, so just difficult to behave, well, abnormal. And as for the fourth cluster, those people believe that autistic people are the ones living in their own world, and this is the exact phrase. Those people, they described autistic people live in their own world, and it is quite interesting that, well, this is like the most neutral phrase how to describe those people, though it's not that they're difficult or that they're bad or that they're wrong. It's like they live in their own world, and this is quite interesting that this is the phrase that most of the respondents used, and that it was that often that they combined their own cluster even. So those are the two types of perceptions that were derived. And the next, we tried to solve the second task, which was about finding the connections and relations of perceptions to all those other characteristics of non-autistic person. Like I said, those were social demographic characteristics, those were objective knowledge, those were having experience of interaction with ASD person. I conducted this task using confirmatory factor analysis models. I created 6 models so that due to our focus on finding the relation between the perceptions and attitudes, and we had attitudes broken into 6 scales. So for each scale of those, I conducted each model. And as we can see below, those are the coefficients of those models combined to one table. Well, we were not able to find any relation between perceptions and attitudes. So it looks like, well, the way how people perceive autistic people doesn't determine how they will, which attitudes they might have, how they might behave towards those people. But besides this, the lack of this relation, we were able to find the following relations. Well, first of all, interest in the topic of ASD. Well, if a person tell about himself that he is interested in this topic, influences the expression of each attitude. So this can be seen by those negative coefficients of interest in the topic to all of the attitudes. There are also interesting relation which proved our hypothesis about this cluster 2, that this is about the people who will probably know more about ASD than from other clusters, and we can see this by this positive relation to objective knowledge. This means that the more, well, like if the knowledge about the ASD of a respondent is, well, correct, I can tell later about how it was measured. Then, well, for those people, it was, well, more likely to come to the cluster 2, and, well, to the cluster 3 go all the people with, like, well, the less objective knowledge, the more likely they go to the cluster 3. There are also some relation between other characteristics, like sex is related to attitude towards autistic people who are adults and aggressive behavior. And this relation might be also explained because, well, probably women are more afraid, or, well, might express their attitude towards aggressive adults with ASD because they're afraid of them, and because they are more might be some kind of danger to them. As for some other characteristics, well, living in Moscow or St. Petersburg, we chose those cities because in Russia, those 2 cities are, like, the most, how to put this, those cities are with more access to correct ASD information. Those cities, well, there is a more probability of meeting an ASD person. So for those cities, it was interesting that for those cities, for people living in those cities, there is a connection with one attitude and one cluster. And having an experience of observation of persons with ASD also relates to adults with usual behavior. So that's it. Well, the conclusion from this all this research. Well, first of all, we determined 4 types of perception, and those 4 types might be interpreted, and it gives the idea of how people might perceive and what image of autistic person they have, and also we were able to get the relation between attitudes and some of the characteristics, like, well, interest in the topic of ASD and other social demographic characteristics. There is also the relation between types of perception and objective knowledge and living in Moscow, St. Petersburg. And unfortunately, we were not able to find this relation between perception and attitudes. Well, it states that well, first of all, when we got those results, we got a little upset because our hypothesis turned out not to be true. But then we gave it another thought, and we thought, well, this might be even more interesting, because, well, not having relation between perception and attitudes might give us the, well, like the reason to think more about this. Maybe there are some other connections, so maybe we can try to find this connection via some other characteristics. So this is still like a thing to think about for the future researchers. So that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kirill, for your presentation. Charlie, do you have comments on that, or we can with something?
Yeah. I'll offer a few comments to get us started. I just had to change location. You might have noticed the connection was very bad in the other room. Okay, yeah. So thanks for that, Kirill. I think for me, I suppose one of the key issues that I'm intrigued by is why perceptions is the dependent variable here in the way that you've constructed it, because arguably you could have put attitudes as, you know, sorry, someone at the, I just have to get the door, sorry. I'm at home, so I have to look after my hand. Just a sec. Okay, I'm just doing a seminar.
We can wait a little bit. Or...
Right, okay, I'm back. So yeah, I thought that attitudes could have been the main focus of the study rather than perceptions, because attitudes could be, you know, are clearly shaped by knowledge and by all of the other factors that you talk about, such as gender, age, location. So, you know, that was one thing. So, you know, have a think about whether or not you sort of flipped it around and used attitudes as the main focus. Second thing was, sorry, just a sec. Shall I go in that room? Sorry, guys, just because I'm working from home, it's not straightforward. Okay, so the second thing was the overall conclusion that a focus on attitudes rather than knowledge, that actually fits the neurodiversity perspective, the idea that, you know, ideally we should be thinking more about people's attitudes and how they should behave towards people with ASD, rather than simply how much they know and understand about ASD. So that conclusion, although I was a bit suspicious of the conclusion, connection that you were looking for, I did think it was kind of in line with the idea that we should be thinking more about neurodiversity. The other aspect, the finding that there is no link between the two between perceptions and all of the other factors that you're looking at. I was surprised that you didn't locate that finding. If you find in a big way contradicts the rest of the literature, then you might want to question why that's happened. And one of the problems that I felt one might identify is that the groups that you come up with, the different sort of perception groups, are, as far as I can tell, really quite similar. So living in their own world, it's neither positive nor negative. It's just a perception about how people with ASD are living. That may be kind of separate from the other ones, but I just thought defective development, problems with communication, socialization, and difficulties in behavior, I just didn't think that these were particularly distinct. They seem to really heavily overlap with each other. And so if the aim here is to construct these kind of concrete, finite groups of people who have these perceptions, and then to look at relationships between that and all of these other variables, then I think it's problematic if these perceptions all overlap with each other in the extent to which they do. So that's something maybe to think about. And then the final thing that I noticed was that you were talking about sex. And when thinking about getting rejections from journals, particularly if these are in any way sociologically inclined journals, then they're not going to look favorably on use of sex rather than gender, because using sex rather than gender is kind of sex role theory. It's structural functionalism. It's 1950s and 1960s sociology rather than 21st century sociology, which would always be talking about gender as a social construct. So that's something to think about as well. Okay, that's my main sort of observations.
Okay, thank you, Charlie, for your feedback. I think I can answer some of the questions, because, first of all, why we focused in this research on the perception is because we have already conducted research on attitudes. One of our previous papers with Irina was about the attitudes itself, where we conducted those attitudes and we described them more. And here we wanted to focus on the perception, because we had this data, and we believed that we might find this connection between perception and attitudes. As for why the perceptions are alike, that's true, and it was quite difficult to work with them, because I tried several techniques of clustering and they didn't work. But this one, they are different because those are the exact words from the answers of respondents. Those is the words that they used, and it was of course they're alike, but this is shows this difference. This is behind this choosing of those words, and this is why those perceptions they're different. Of course they're alike, but probably we could have used some other technique of how we can measure the perception, maybe not by text, by something, but by something else. But in this case, this perception would have been different from how we understand this. So this is, I agree with you that those clusters are quite alike, but still we believe that even though so choosing of words, this is like might show that well, like people still differently perceive those people, and this might show us this that they have some kind of relation to attitudes. So that's it. And about using the word sex, yeah, I agree with you. I don't remember if we used this term in the paper. I believe we did. So we'll be I believe that I will keep that in mind while with my further articles, that I shouldn't use this word, that this is not correct to use sex instead of gender. So thank you.
Okay. Just one more thing to sort of to go back to the point that I made before the presentation, where I was thinking about the micro and the macro dimensions of the experience of people with ASD, specifically in Russia. And I think the problem with these literatures, from what I know more broadly, is that there tends to be a kind of Anglo-centrism to the literature, where someone in the UK or America is writing about attitudes towards ASD, and they don't especially talk about the cultural or the policy context. They just talk about attitudes out there in society. And there's an assumption that society, that say American society or UK society, is somehow a standard society. Yeah. So there's no problematization of that at all. This is one of the main criticisms that I have of Western sociology, that it's very Anglo-centric. It's not aware of its own provinciality, if that makes sense. It's not aware of its own specificity, the specificity of the societies that it's talking about. Like I write predominantly about Russia and other post-socialist societies. It's very important to set out what is the context, what society are you talking about here, in which people have these attitudes and in which those attitudes might have been shaped, you know. And so the fact that that's absent in your paper, I can see where that comes from. It's absent in most of the Western literature as well. Yeah, it's normal for this to be absent in the Anglo-American literature, but I think that that's really problematic in the Western literature, and it does mean that, you know, in order to make a contribution, I think you have to talk about cultural context, about historical context, and about policy context. And I think that should be really, you know, the main sort of, or at least 50% of the contribution that you're making, rather than this kind of complex statistical modeling, which is one contribution. I think there needs to be that cultural and historical dimension as well, for this to really make sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, but well, it looks like, well, I think that when we were conducting this research, we didn't think about looking to different perspectives, because, well, to be honest, we used we measured Russian attitudes, well, because we are from Russia and this is the sample that we could have gotten. We didn't have this idea that, well, because it looks like to think about the context, it could have been great if we were able to collect this type of data, well, of Russian people and of, well, English people or of the American people, and to compare those. But well, we didn't focus on that. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Okay, I mean, that might be the way to turn this into a publishable paper, by, you know, working on the actual statistical analysis and contribution that you're making there, but repackaging it in a more culturally historically aware literature review, research in a way that it makes a contribution on that as on the at this stage. If you wanted to two different journals, I'm not sure which journals you've sent this to, but say for example, if you sent this to say Europe Asia Studies, which I'm sure you're familiar with, so Yelena Rostislavna and myself and Nikita, we all published in this this journal recently. This paper that you've written wouldn't be of any interest as it stands to something like Europe Asia Studies, because it doesn't say anything about Russia, not anything at all. Yeah, so it would only be of interest to a journal that has no kind of social interest. So to make it of interest to that kind of journal, you'd have to bring in a major focus on disability policy, on on how people with ASD are positioned by different sort of ideologies, within Soviet and post-Soviet ideologies. That's that kind of question. So it's an option if you want to take it in that direction.
Yeah, well, we tried to send this paper to autism-specific papers, because there are two papers that publish only articles on autism-related topics, and they also publish not some neurobiological papers, but also psychology and sociology articles. So we send it to autism. This is like the name of the journal, and also the Journal of Autism Studies, something like this. We tried to those papers and it didn't work out with them for us. Okay.
So when you say that you got no feedback, that means that it was what's called desk rejected, I think. Yeah, so no one reviewed it. So what happens is the editor receives all of the submissions and they send them out to review, and then they make a decision based on review, or they don't send them out to review. They just reject it before reviewing it, and that's why there was no feedback. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of great data in what you've got here, and I think that I just think that you need to reframe it. And repackage it, and it could then be a really good contribution.
Okay, thank you.
Yelena, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, Yelena's hands up.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please let me know if I will have some echo, then I will reload. Sometimes my computer does. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and introduction by Charlie, and then comments by Charlie, and this actually dialogue with Kirill, and obviously supported by Irina. I think you should really, if you want to publish this article, and I would like to encourage both of you to publish it, because it's a great study, and also it is one of the few that would like introduce information about Russia, about this public attitudes towards autism, ASD, people with ASD, to the general public, to the international audience. That's why it's important from many sense. So in order to make it publishable, maybe you should a little bit reframe the genre, and actually there are publications that are pure, so to say, like research report genre publications like yours. I just come across several articles about public attitudes or perception, public attitudes towards or perception of people with ASD in the relevant journals. And yes, you are right, these journals are mostly focused on autism studies. There are several of them. But actually, these articles like go further, or they are a little bit more focused. For example, they are focused on comparison between the perceptions of the peers with autism and with maybe without autism, or some other variable is added, or maybe they are focused on the role of, like you have. Could you please show the slide with the factors? You have this observation. I just wanted to ask also if you mean contact, contact, like, no, there was another slide without a table, just with a list of variables that work as maybe some explanatory. Yes, here, the relation. Yes, relation.
Yeah. So
you say you have this having experience of observation, which also sounds a little bit like out of mainstream discourse today, because mostly the studies discuss contact theory. Like if you have a contact with a migrant or with people with some disability, with a person, if you have a relative. By the way, it also goes about social distance. But I mean, this contact theory is very, very, it's a common sense place, commonplace now. So if you, maybe you could explain what you mean by observation, because people may observe without knowing that this is autism spectrum disorder. Or they can observe by while having this person as a relative in the family, as a brother, for example, they can also observe. So what do you mean by observation? Could you clarify?
The observation is about, well, having contact, because we measured this, had a few questions about, have you observed a person with ASD? Have you communicated, or do you have a relative with ASD?
Yes,
so
very good. This is very good. So, for example, the one of the articles that I come across was devoted to the analysis of this role of contact in like its impact on the attitudes or perception or whatever. So I think it would be great to highlight these relational factors or variables that actually are related, or maybe they can explain something. And maybe sacrifice a little bit your beautiful calculations, maybe make it shorter, maybe publish them in Russian and then make a reference in this article to the publication. And add some context, like Charlie has said, about actually the discussion, by the way, in this journal of intellectual and developmental autism studies or something like that. They, if you search by the keyword Russia, you will mostly, of course, find psychiatry and medical publications, but some of them are written by famous Russian psychiatrists who are, I mean, guru in today's autism studies or even policies, treatment, and so on. It doesn't mean that they are fully correct in their explanations, because there are now a big, sharp discussion between people from Center of Curative Pedagogy and people from some medical institutions. So maybe you could introduce such discussion. Maybe you could, because this understanding of autism in various senses, and medical, as behavioral, as social problem, is very, very recent in Russia. While in the West, there were already books published and centers established and institutions developed and whatever, I mean, different education programs, and people with autism have been already known as authors of fiction or autobiographical novels. Here in Russia, there were still very, very Stone Age knowledge type of among the professionals, without mentioning what the parents themselves did. You know, they did, they're trying some mythology, some superstitious methods of curing autism in their children. It was just maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And even now, if we are talking about a province, about regional situation. So now, of course, we have a lot of publications, but we still have a divide, this disruption, I mean, discussion and conflicts. And but on the one hand, so it's about knowledge. It's about knowledge, and it's a contested field. Right, and there are institutionalized knowledge and also lay knowledge and so on. On the other hand, there are there is a huge rise. Of course, everybody knows we have just passed the Day of Autism, International Day of Autism, and in Russia, in Moscow, of course, in Moscow and St. Petersburg, there were a lot of bright, brilliant events. Including conferences, participatory conferences where parents talked. I'm not sure about people with autism, maybe we are not yet at this stage, but we are soon there. So, and if you show in one paragraph, in one, I mean, section of your article, this development of knowledge, so like it was very rapid development, but it's still not, I mean, in official medicine or official social services, there is no lack of recognition. But on the side of civil society, non-governmental experts, some of them collaborate, of course, with the state sector, we have a huge impact. I collected interviews, conducted interviews with the colleagues who went through Center of Curative Pedagogy, I don't know, fellowship, стажировка, practice, whatever, field work. So they have absolutely different knowledge base and value system, attitudes, and so on. And it changes gradually, but it does. But the next section could be about this non-governmental sector, self-organized grassroots, parental associations, big networks of supported recently by the recently left foundations and sponsors, but still these grassroots exist. Yes, and they have inclusive cafes, they have inclusive workshops, ceramic workshops. So, I mean, there are a lot of reports and beautiful publications about it in the media. So you could just make a little description. So it is not a research, it is contextual based. So I think 2/3 of your article should be occupied by the context. So you show that the people who live in Moscow and St. Petersburg, of course, they are exposed to these changes. They are taking part, they are going for a walk to the park, and they participate in these events. Also parents and other relatives who have a child or young adult with ASD can find the service and very interesting, I don't know, theatric clubs, whatever. I mean, various inclusive and specialized practices and so on. What else? Of course, they are exposed of observation. Of course, they have developed more interest to the topic of ASD. And by the way, the topic of the issue of gender is also very sensitive and interesting. How it's related with attitudes, because mostly, as we know, this non-governmental sector is driven and supported and actually developed by women. and the parental associations mostly are run by women. So it is not directly related to your survey because you are surveying general public. But at the same time, in the context, we see this invisible force, invisible power, so to say, that gradually changes the context. I mean, this film festivals, whatever. And then in your third part, you condense your procedure and this calculation. You can, I mean, you are very capable of expressing it in a short way, maybe referring to your other publication. And then your article will be like familiarizing the general audience, international audience, with the situation in Russia. Because otherwise it looks like yesterday of maybe not even, maybe last year of the studies, because in the world, these studies progressed long ago about this public attitudes towards, and they, I mean, the editors would say, what can we find new and interesting in this? Because they always think about their age index, which depends on the readership, because the readership are researchers, academia. And the academia know everything about autism and the attitudes towards people with ASD, but they know nothing about Russia. And they know nothing, especially today, a very dangerous country and so on. So think about it and also read the articles about the same topic in the journals you are interested in. We are preparing the idea, the proposal to a special issue, and we will talk with you and Irina Kazbekton later individually. But anyway, it would be nice to read a similar article about some country, like country report, so to say. Like I imagined such kind of article from some, sorry, it is not directly global south, Russia is not global south, but still from some global south countries. So they usually explain the situation in policy, the situation in public opinion, and they say what could be done. So public opinion is just one of the I don't know, side dish, so to say. It might be a main dish, but still it should be surrounded and served. Thank you very much. Marina also wants to say something.
I guess I can ask a question, right? Thank you, colleagues, for your presentation and all the discussion. I had a question about your cluster model. It is, have you tried other methods of clustering like K-means or K-means? For example, or you were concentrated only on hierarchical. Oh my God, I have problems today with my speaking. Yeah, thank you.
First of all, thank you, Elena, for your feedback. Well, as for answering to this question, yes, I did try all of those methods. And why I've chosen this hierarchical clustering is because it worked the best, and well, I got interpretable clusters. Well, I tried several techniques. I changed the parameters of the clustering, and well, the one that worked was this one, and this the distance of cosine similarities between the TF-IDF of tokens of each text. So yes, I did try, and this is the best that that I got.
Thank you, Kirill. And by saying the best, you mean like the best, you were getting the best interpretation, or something else like, I don't know.
Oh, I'll say interpretation.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So we also have the comments and questions in the chat. Kirill, should I pronounce them, or you can pronounce and answer?
Well, first of all, it takes a few seconds to read those questions. Well, I believe that the first question is about also the parameters of the clustering. So yes, clusters 2 and clusters 4, they're close to each other, but what differs them is, like I said, the exact words. In cluster 4, people use this phrase, live in their own world, and they this is the one that met in a lot of texts. So this is why this cluster derives to each other. Well, I believe that I did answer the question. Well, about the sample and target population, well, this data was collected in 2019 in April, because, well, I collected this data for my bachelor's graduate work, and, well, then I used this data for other research. Well, there were not refusals. There were about 1,300 completed surveys, and about up to maybe 400 who didn't complete the survey, but I used only the ones that were completed. Objective knowledge is somehow that, this is another concept. We measured it by a few questions about when we asked people to select correct, well, there were 8 statements about ASD, and 4 of them were correct, well, correct to the scientific term of ASD, and 4 were the myth and the knowledge that is based on stereotypes. So, for example, that vaccination might cause autism. This is the fact that scientifically that there are no scientific proof that ASD might be caused by vaccination. So, and, well, based on the answers of people to this question, we, well, conducted this objective knowledge, and we get it as a scale, and we believe that, well, this is how many correct and how many incorrect terms people chose. So we well, calculated this, like, is a person truly knows what ASD is, or he choose incorrect statements about this, and, well, most probably he doesn't know what it is for sure. So this is what is objective knowledge.
Kirill, are you done with Violetta Maksudovna questions?
Yeah. I'll say I'm done. Yeah.
Well, there are some discussion points, but I thought so. We already partly discussed this. Somehow, Elena Rostislavna, you want to add something?
Yes, I would like to say that it is very good, very important, and I think it's a very strong side of this article and this authors, that is very strong in a methodological sense, because it is not very difficult to bring in this contextual information, of course, it should be nicely wrapped and also theoretically reflected, but without strong methodological base, without this data that are correctly collected and analyzed, it would be vulnerable. I mean, it would be not easy to complete and to edit and to submit to the journal. So I think you have the most important base because you will describe it as a methodology, method, sample, and the analysis, and you can do it very good. But of course, in your literature review and your maybe background section or somehow else you will frame it, you will do a sort of case study, like maybe some features of the dynamics in cultural and social, I don't know, maybe conditions that actually framed such situation. Of course, it would be nice to have statistics and dynamics to see how perception and attitudes change, but yet we don't have the next portion of survey. Yet for your contextual sections, you could refer to published reports and articles based on public opinion survey conducted by FCOM and other agencies that also ask public, I mean, general public on social distance and attitudes. And for example, do you agree if your child could be enrolled in the class together with, and then several different characters appear there in the list, including migrants and also now they include people with ASD. So it is also fine to show, and some of them could be comparable in chronological order in dynamics. I don't mean that this is a separate research. It's just your review of context, and anyway you will refer to certain sources, and this is also, I think, a nice idea to show that even public opinion, especially we know that for example FCOM in collaboration with the Naked Hearts Foundation recently conducted a big public opinion survey on the meaning of inclusion, how people think about inclusion, how they understand, and the foundation Naked Hearts is specializing on ASD, helping people, helping children with ASD and their families. And maybe in this survey they asked questions about ASD. I don't remember, but it's accessible. It's available in internet. Right. So yes, I think I see Daria is here. Nikita has left, but Daria knows also that we had a survey in post-socialist space in several countries, and we should have. Irina Kazbekova knows, because Irina has been dealing with this data set, so maybe we also have this variable of child with ASD, because I remember that one of our partners who helped us with data collection was parental association Autism Regione, and that's why maybe we even have this balance in our sample with more representation of parents of children with autism. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. So it would be enriched and saturated with a variety of sources that would introduce a Russian situation and show this as a complex and multi-sided situation of developing or changing public attitudes. Thank you very much. Charlie, would you like to conclude?
I would just like to add, to reiterate what you said, Yelena, about how, this is a good study in terms of the data and the way that the data are worked with and presented, the data analysis. So it's just a question of packaging. And as Yelena said, this is much easier to deal with than, getting the data and analyzing the data. So there's a lot of literature there that could be brought in. I'm especially keen for you to bring in a perspective on neurodiversity, which seems to be, a key dimension of the research on ASD at the moment, moving away from some sort of a normative approach and looking at how included people are, but with a normative perspective, and instead moving to a neurodiverse perspective in order to encourage, a more genuine form of inclusion of people with ADS. And so there's no reason why that can't be part of the discussion that you have based on the data that you've got. I'd also encourage, Yelena talked a lot about the sort of developments in recent years and how things are moving quite quickly in Russia at the moment in relation to ASD. I think it's important to put the more historical context in there as well, to give you that starting point. Why is it that people have historically had a very low awareness of ASD in Russia? And so the Soviet context is important in framing that as well. You don't have to talk for a long time about it. You need to reference that as, as part of the historical context, and then bring that up to date with the more contemporary context. And something that we haven't really covered is, so we've talked about the historical context and about the changing contemporary context, non-governmental organizations. Have there been any developments in policy at all? Inclusive education, we haven't really talked about, but inclusive education is one of the key policy areas through which people with ASD are included. So what's going on in that respect? And that's where parents might come across people with ASD. It's, that's where members of the public will have some contact with young people with ASD, is at the level of kindergarten, school, so what's going on there, and how have things changed, and what are the policy prospects at the moment? So all of that, it's fairly easy to get into this and to package your data within all of that, and then it's going to be much more interesting for any journal.
Yes, I would like to add just three things. First, that when we say about people with ASD, usually public or our respondents imagine adults. And of course, we have less services or programs for adults than for children. But still, there are some developments in this area, like this assisted living programs that are just on the very, very beginning of the development, also with the participation of non-governmental organizations. And also there are some very interesting developments in the field of inclusive employment. There are even some companies that are recruiting people with autism and training the employers how to prepare working place for these workers and how to deal, how to communicate with them. So there are such interesting HR companies, small businesses that function as bridges between community of parents of people with ASD and markets. This is one thing. Another thing is that actually is for Charlie and for everybody, that as we see in many cases, the discussion part of the article is very short or even empty, and we have to decide if we actually need to put discussion as a section in each article in our project, so to say, in our collection, because if you have a discussion, then you will use your conclusions, your findings, to debate with existing publications, with other authors, or maybe to bring them to support your claims. So it is a dialogue with other authors in the discussion. So now, because now your discussion section is more like empty. And the third point is also very challenging for me and maybe for you. Now we have lack in Russia, lack of actually actors who have certain developmental disabilities themselves, but at the same time they are experts, authors, consultants, and so on. So I don't know if you have in mind such somebody who could, I don't know, review your paper or maybe write a part and become your co-author. So I think such a participatory approach would also benefit. I mean, the paper would benefit, but it is not, of course, the necessary condition. I just know that it is now very, very important characteristics of international academia. Studying some kinds of disabilities that usually, I mean, now are represented also by the authors who have such experience. Yeah, okay, that's all. Many suggestions, right?
Dear colleagues, thank you for fruitful discussion. If anybody wants to say something, you can, and we will end our seminar.
Well, I would like just to thank all colleagues for very fruitful discussion and somehow new point of view on our text.
So okay, thank you all. Thank you, Charlie and Elena Rostislavna. We will meet for the next seminar, and we will inform you in the email. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thank you
for organizing.
Bye,
Thanks.